I'd like to talk about stigma and stigma around mental health. But before we jump into that, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Ghazala. I'm at the Heart and Soul Cafe, and if you've been here before, thank you so much for coming back. I so appreciate it. And if you're here for the first time, you're very, very welcome. So before we start talking about stigma around mental health, let's sort of look at a definition first. So what is stigma? We sort of more or less know what it means, but if we had to explain it to someone, or we look in a dictionary, what might we find? Well, stigma is a set of negative beliefs, false beliefs, or attitudes, or prejudices, could be biases, that a group of people or a part of society hold against another group of people or part of society that might demonstrate a particular behavior. Wow, that's a mouthful, isn't it? And I didn't sort of parrot learn that. I've got it in front of me just to make sure that I get that in the right order. Stigma. Now, so how does stigma come about when it comes to mental health? Well, we see it all the time and we hear it all the time. What kind of language have we been using about mental health? Well, I remember when I was at school, it was sort of society's norm to say things like, such as, oh, so-and-so is mental, so-and-so is mad, so-and-so belongs in the funny farm or the loony house or the nut house, or all sorts of things, if you think about it, were all playing in on the stigma around mental health. Later on, we still hear it, but we don't hear it quite as much because we're more mindful about these things now. But we still say things like, oh, I'm a bit OCD because I like a tidy desk, and I've done a video about that. But we're actually trivializing something that's quite serious, something that's quite debilitating, like OCD. I have clients who've washed their hands so much that their hands chap and bleed. That's not trivial. That's not, I've known people that, spend so much, got so many rituals that they go through before leaving the house that, an hour later, they could be still going through those rituals. And if, for example, they feel that they've left something out, it's not a matter of just going to, check on that one thing that they've missed. They need to go through the whole ritual again from the beginning to the end until they get it right. So, it can be highly, highly debilitating. Other language such as, I'm feeling so depressed, and I've done a video about that as well, where we throw these words around and trivialize them so much, whereas what we should be saying something, we're just basically having a bad day. We're having a bad day, and you start using language such as, I'm depressed. Depression can be so highly debilitating. It can mean that the person can't get out of bed in the morning, let alone, sort of get to work. But, so it's, obviously it depends on the severity of the depression, because depression could be, mild, moderate to severe. But still, we sort of tend to use this kind of language, which then stigmatizes, mental health. If we're around someone who's actually struggling with a mental health condition, and we're using language such as, so-and-so's, someone's OCD because they're, checking whether the window's locked, using, it's just an example. But if you're around somebody and someone in your presence actually experiences OCD, they're not really going to come out and sort of share that with you if you have that kind of attitude. Yeah. If your workplace has that kind of attitude, generally around mental health, or we don't have, mental health around it. What's mental health? We don't have that. If you have that kind of attitude, well, everyone has mental health, but what they mean is poor mental health. If if you have that kind of a culture around your workplace, then someone who is struggling is not really going to come forward and talk about, their mental health. If people around them are using words such as, it's a weakness, and things like that. And what have we been saying to men? We've been saying, men don't cry, big girls blouse, stop being a sissy, stop crying like a girl. I heard that just a few weeks ago, I heard a young father saying that to their son in broad daylight, everyone could hear, "Stop crying like a girl." And I thought, oh my goodness, we're giving those messages to, young males at a very early age, that crying is a weakness, and crying is, showing a sign of femininity. And, if you're a man, you're not that, although, so it's all these sort of things that are all adding to the stigma around mental health. What other sort of things have we been hearing? Soldier on, and, just carry on type of thing. And it's a very British, sort of stiff upper lip type of thing, isn't it? That you don't show your emotions, and you don't, because it's a sign of weakness, and, being vulnerable and showing your vulnerability is a sign of weakness, and you don't do that. And then, it's all playing into the, it's why we have this situation now, with mental health. We have, even though we are talking about it more, we've come a long way, but we've got a long way to go when it comes to mental health, because there's still a lot of stigma around it. Still, people don't come forward and talk about their, and one of the reasons could be that they don't feel understood, or they don't feel that anyone would understand them if they were to share. Other reasons are, what support have we got in place? Well, we haven't got an awful lot of support, I must say that. It doesn't, according to how much need there actually is out there. So we don't have enough support. And if people are sort of then put on waiting lists, if they do come forward, let's say for counselling, they're put on a long waiting list, let's say with the NHS, because just over exhausted, then, how are people then going to feel that that they should come forward and they should share how they're feeling? Because they're probably thinking, well, what's anyone going to do even if I did share, And there's also a thing, again, a stigma against talking as well. People still believe that if I was to talk about how I'm feeling, what good would that do? I've still got the situation that I have. My circumstances are still the same. It hasn't changed anything. I've still got all the issues that I had before I sort of talked about it and shared with somebody about what's going on. But the fact is that sharing and talking actually does offload. It does offload, and it gets what's up here, out in the open. And by putting it out in the open means that you've sort of somewhat processed it and put things into perspective. Sometimes we can be worrying and, ruminating about things in our own head. And once we actually share and put it out in the open, we can sort of realize that, well, maybe, I was sort of like overly worried about something that, maybe, I didn't need to be so much, or it doesn't sound so bad now that I've sort of shared it, that kind of thing. So it's always a good idea to talk. It's always a good idea to share. So language, very much so, has been this biggest thing that adds to stigma around mental health. And the media as well. I mean, if you think about psychosis, for example, anything to do with any kind of psychotic, diagnosis, in social media or in the movies, let's say in films, what kind of things have they portrayed when it comes to anyone with any kind of psychotic, disorder? It's always been, like a mad axeman with a, running around, killing people. There's more chances of someone who's experiencing psychosis being, a victim of, violent crime than being a perpetrator. There's more chances of you being attacked by somebody who's, under the influence of alcohol than being someone who's having a psychotic episode, let's say. So, there's all sorts of things that have fed into the stigma around mental health conditions. And, we as a society can only raise awareness by sharing, by talking, and, changing things, shifting things, like commit You know, we sort of talk about, and I shared this in another video, like commit to suicide. Now, you know, suicide was decriminalised in the UK in 1961, but we still use that word commit as if somebody is committing a crime. So they're feeling so suicidal and also feeling as if they're a criminal as well, and that's not going to help. So again, so much language around mental health that adds to that stigma around mental health. And, you know, if we get to a point where we can talk about our mental health as easy as we can talk about our physical health, you know, it's a long way to go. You know, if you think about it, can we talk about, let's say, for example, you took some time off work, and it was because you were, you know, feeling depression, you were feeling severe depression, would you find it, you know, as easy to share that with someone if, you know, if you were sort of had time off work because you broke your leg, let's say, you know? And the answer probably no. It would be easier to talk about my broken leg than it would be about my, you know, depression. And it's because of all the stigma around it. Because you're frightened that you're going to get a label put on your forehead, you know, that's the person with the depression, and, you know, can no longer be, you know, trusted with my, you know, given responsibilities perhaps. And that's what we're frightened about. And we're frightened about that because there's so much ignorance around it and we're not talking about it enough. And yeah, things that we don't know about are frightening. Things that we don't talk about are frightening because, you know, we're not bringing things out in the open, and we're not educating ourselves. The more we educate ourselves, the more empowered we feel and the more in control we feel about what it is that we're carrying. That's important. Thank you. And that's probably one of the reasons why I talk about my own grief, bereavement, my own journey, my own, you know, what I've gone through when I was feeling depressed, when I felt anxious in the past as well, my, you know, situational anxiety, my imposter syndrome. Well, you know, there's quite a lot of things, and obviously my grief symptoms I talk about quite a lot. So the reason why I do that is to raise awareness, to dismantle stigma around, you know, mental health, around things that we carry, and to give that message that, you know, we can carry things and we can still function. It's not that thing that we're carrying defines us. We're so many things. We're so multifaceted as human beings. There's so many things to us, you know. And I like to use the analogy that I see human beings as if we're made out of a jigsaw puzzle. So there's lots and lots of pieces, and every time life throws a curveball, and life often does, you know, a new piece goes in. And every time we experience something new, a new piece goes in. So we're forever evolving and growing and learning, and, you know, it's never quite the same. I happen to have a big piece in my jigsaw puzzle, which is my grief piece. That one piece doesn't define who I am, because I'm so many other things as well. But it's a piece that needs to be there to make the whole of me. Okay? So it's all the things that we pick up along our lives as we go through our lives. And yeah, the more pieces we pick up, the smaller those pieces go, and the more pieces we have in our little puzzle, the older we get. And that's all a matter of part of our wisdom, isn't it? And yeah, so we can learn so much from each other. So thank you for listening. I hope this content of this video was helpful to you. Or if you think it might be helpful to somebody else, please do pass it on. Share, and please do like, subscribe, comment. Let's get a conversation going. Okay. Thank you so much for listening. I hope to see you in the next video. Until then, look after your heart and your soul. Thank you.